Rabbi, so in the middle of the Gavaldige Sugya talking about whiskey, I want to mention an addition that was told to me just after the share yesterday. So I want to mention this very important addition because the Olim were very, very worried when we were talking about the difference between Irish whiskey and Scottish whiskey. So Lemaisa comes out like this, that it came out around 2005 that the Irish stopped allowing from putting various ingredients in there. And that basically ended the problem, at least what they're London-based are saying at the moment, of adding various things that may be trafe inside the Irish whiskey. But that will depend on the year of whiskey that you're buying. For example, if you're buying an 18-year-old, then it's not going to help you. Why? Simply because it's before they made that rule. So in other words, you've got to keep in touch with the Metzias. I guess ask the local kashrus organizations whether or not that has actually been changed. But that was the latest development in that particular sugya. Let's move on to our sugya that we are obviously getting towards, and that is the sherry cask Inyan. So where does it start from? Really, yesterday we basically went through a little bit of the production of how whiskey is made, the ingredients that they use, and we basically came out that there's no major problems involved in a regular Scottish whiskey. There cannot be any major issues because they're not allowed to add ingredients, and generally they do not, in which case there's no real problem of kashrus. So what is the problem? Where did it start? And where do we find ourselves today? That's the shaila. So it really begins in the 1860s. In 1860, sherry, Spanish sherry was imported into the UK, and sherry, obviously, for those that don't know what that means, that obviously means wine, of which we all know that there is an issa of a person, of a Jew, drinking wine that was produced, touched, moved by a goy, right? It's called the issa of yain nesach, or nowadays the Ramah calls it stam yainom, because generally most of our goyim are not actually worshipping the wine, and therefore it's what we call stam yainom. Maybe it's mutar bahano, but it's osher l'shtir, you cannot drink it. That's, by the way, just to understand the definition of the term sherry. But in 1860, this Spanish sherry was imported into the UK, and once it was imported in, obviously, these casks, right, the wooden casks, and they were left with the empty cask. They didn't know what to do with it. Now, to ship it back to Spain would be a little bit interesting. It'd be quite expensive and unnecessary to do that, and they didn't know what to do. So the only good, thing that they could decide to do was the whiskey companies, who also use casks and barrels to store their whiskey, said, hey, I got a great idea. This will be much cheaper for us to actually store our whiskey in. So they started to basically buy them for very, very cheap, and they started to make and store their whiskeys in these casks. Here began the shaila of a sherry cask, 1860, Rabbi say. Already started the shaila of a sherry cask. Why was the whiskey stored in there? So many reasons that they gave was because it was simply cheaper. It was just an easier way. It was much cheaper. It was like a second-hand cask, and therefore second-hand casks are obviously cheaper than first brand new ones, and therefore it was cheaper. Right? That was the advantage. Right? That's what it was. There's no reason that they wanted the taste. There's no reason that they wanted the sherry and the whiskey, but it's possibly a simple way to do it. There was another advantage as well that they found, was that it gives the whiskey a very rich color, which also helps as well. And another thing as well is that the sherry neutralized the bitter, unwanted taste that a brand new oak cask can give the whiskey. So they basically found a few advantages at the same time. Now originally that wasn't the kavanah, originally it was cheaper, and they wanted to get rid of them. So the shaila basically is like this. Let me go through a couple of the shailas. I'm not going to go through it be'in. We could spend a long time on this, and there are many, many tshuvas that are written in length, be'in, going through sugyas in Yeridea that explain to us exactly what's going on. It's absolutely mind-boggling how much time we can spend on this sugya. But just to give you a little bit of what they call the Rosh Prokim, right? A little bit of the surface Inyan of what's the issa over here. So the first one obviously is the issa of stam yainom. Shulchan discussed this in Yeridei Semekuf Lamed Zayin, that there's an issa of stam yainom. You cannot have anything that imparts its taste into anything else. However, there are certain things that what we call shah mashkim, other liquids, that are poigim the taste of the yain. And the shaila is whiskey something that's poigim the taste, like shah mashkim, that will be poigim the taste of the wine? That is the shaila over there. The Noda B'Yehuda Yehuda tainas that it would be, the Magen Avraham tainas that it would not be. We're not going to go into all the different shittas, as I told you. We could spend hours discussing it, but that's one of the shaylas. The Minchas Yitzchak has a tshuva Dayan Weiss, the head of the Badatz, Eitz Charedis over here, originally from Manchester, and he lived over here, was the head of the Badatz. The Minchas Yitzchak has a gewaldige tshuva in Chedik Beis, where he wants to say, Efsha, there's a mokum to make it. We'll discuss that in a moment. There's another major shayla involved over here is what about bittul? We know the halacha that if, for example, a drop of milk falls into a chicken soup, as long as there's 60 more chicken soup than the actual milk that fell in, it's bottle, and the chicken soup is 100% mutter. There's a din of bittul. So would I say that if I have a huge barrel, true, there's a little bit of taste of the sherry in there, but how much whiskey is there? Can I know? There's tons. There'd be a shayla of bittul. It would be bottle. In other words, the taste of the sherry that went in. Remember, we're not talking about dirty casks. We're not talking about there's still a little residue and there's still liquid. The casks are 100% dry. They're dry to the bone. However, when you store something in there, as we said yesterday, wood is porous, it breathes, and therefore it absorbs taste, and therefore gives out that taste. But how much taste already? So l'chayra, it could be very much going to be bottle in that case. You have another thing as well. You have something called zev goyim, right? The Ramah talks about in the end of Simon Peizayin. Zev goyim means that if you have two things that are goyim, two things that cause something, right? So as long as there's not koyach and the issa by itself, and I also need the heta, and they both are contributing to the issa, right? In other words, to make it work, so it could be there's a mokum to be makel. So maybe I would say the same thing over here. I have zev goyim, I have the sherry in the actual cask, and then I have the cask itself that gives over its own, taste of the wood and everything else that develops and makes the whiskey what it is. So there are many, many different shaylas that are nageya in the shayla. What about chazusa, for example? The Ramah discusses this in Yeridei Semekuf Beis, that if something is put in there specifically for the color, then it's never going to be bottle. Even though we have a klal of bottle b'shishim, there will be no bottle b'shishim over here. Why? Because something, says the Ramah in Yeridei Semekuf Beis, that is done specifically for the actual color. I also, by the way, the same thing would apply for the taste as well. If you put something specifically for the taste, so even though there's 60 more heta than issa, which normally means it's bottle, which normally means it's mutter, since it's there specifically for the taste, for example, the Ramah famously discussed the shayla of salt that's avodah zarah. What's the din of salt that's avodah zarah? Whatever the case would be. Salt, at the end of the day, gives like a shmaka taste to the whole food. Now, it's for sure going to be bottle b'shishim. How much salt do you put into the food? Much less than 60. But if that's the case, if it's there for the taste and you can taste it, memela, it's going to be a problem. Anyone with me? I'm just giving you, Moshe, we could spend 3 weeks just going through each one of these heterim. What's that? Oh, so we're going to get there. We're going to give you first the shaylas, understand what exactly is going on. What goes into the shayla before we just go through what the halacha l'maisa is in that case. So that was just to give you a little bit of a background over here. So Rav Moshe has a tshuva. And Rav Moshe wants to say, be'etzem, you could be mekel, based on many of the shaylas that we just mentioned, zev goyim, and all other things as well that Rav Moshe goes through. But there's another problem, because this is what I'm discussing now, was so far in 1860. If we fast forward a little bit to 1970, the problem is this thing. The problem is in 1970, people they weren't drinking so much sherry. Right? I guess earlier on they were drinking a lot of sherry, a lot of wine, and eventually stopped drinking sherry, so it reduced the importing of these casks from the sherry companies, because nobody was drinking so much sherry. So now the whiskey company had a problem. That's number one. In the 1990s, fast forward a little bit, the EU made a new regulation that it's asa to bring in sherry in wooden casks. You're not allowed. You have to bottle it in the country that it's made, and you ship it in the bottle. A lot more expensive, but that was the new regulation that the EU made in 1990. So now we have a problem. The whiskey companies no longer had access to so many sherry casks as they had originally, so they went back to the original mahalach, which was using normal wood American bourbon casks, which is obviously no shayla of sherry whatsoever, which one in many of the whiskeys are going to be okay. 90% of them are produced in these sorts of casks. In that case over there was still 10% that was still with sherry, but at the end of the day, that's what they did. However, they found out and they realized that the taste wasn't the same. Yes, they went back to the original mahalach of using the regular bourbon oak casks, but the problem was the taste wasn't the same. The whiskey wasn't as geschmack as it used to be, right? So they had to come up with a new mahalach. So let me give you some examples of the mahalach that they came up with. So, again, this is all based on the history that we said of how things went from the years of when originally they got sherry until they no longer did. So, for example, Macallan came up and they went through huge lengths to try and get some sherry casks. They went to Spain and they ordered them, these sherry casks. They kept them there for 2 years to absorb the taste. And then they kept the sherry in the casks for 2 years so that the barrel gets the taste. They threw out the sherry. They didn't want the sherry, and they just imported the casks that were empty. That's what Macallan did over there. Highland Park, for example, for any of you that are familiar with a lot of these makes, Highland Park Distillery bought cases from America, shipped them to Spain, leased them to the sherry producers for approximately 3 years to use for their sherry, emptied them in the garbage, and sent them to Scotland. You have to realize, by the way, each of these casks, with all the costs that we're discussing, costs approximately 500 euros just for a cask, because I had to get shipped to Spain, had to be used for 2 years, and then emptied and shipped over. A normal oak bourbon cask would cost you approximately $92. So you're talking about 500 euros, which is approximately $500 in comparison to $92 just to have the sherry taste. Just for a moment when we talk about halacha lemaisa, do they really want the sherry in the whiskey? Glenmorangie, Balvenie, and others, they basically got cask and they poured in sherry. Some for 2 years, and this way they got a sherry cask. What some did, a very interesting mahalach, is what they call either scorching or toasting, where what they do is they light a fire inside the barrel just for a few seconds, and that opens up all the pores. You pour sherry in there just for a few minutes, it can actually work. I don't know exactly how long you have to keep the sherry in for. I guess if you want to try this one at home, I guess I'd have to contact the companies to ask them that. But there's a way of making the barrel much, much more absorbent for the sherry. Now, the big problem is we have tshuvas from Rav Moshe and we have tshuvas on the Minchas Chitzok that seem to be mekel. And if that's the case, then there should be no problem with sherry. The problem is when they wrote their tshuvas, they wrote them in a situation, and you could see based on their tshuvas very clearly that the only reason that they're using sherry casks is simply because that's what they have. It's cheaper, it's easier, it's more available, so why not? Agav, it has a geschmack taste. Agav, it has a geschmack color. Beseda, or it's a shayla, this and this also cause it to happen. But it's not pshat that they really want it. The problem is much worse than that. Because nowadays the companies not only go through so much, they go through lengths and money in order to dafka get sherry casks in that case. So therefore, the heterim that Rav Moshe and the Minchas Chitzkot both gave are a little bit outdated, simply because we have a much worse problem in this case. The Minchas Chitzkot, for example, in Chelik Zayin seems to be chayz on that which he wrote in Chelik Beis, and he wants to be machmei bin Zerashba, that says anything that's ikra letam is automatically not going to be bottled in that case. So therefore, because of that, that's the reason why many of the Gedolim say that it's worse than it used to be. Let me give you a little bit of a sikum la'alocha lemaisa. So again, we've gone through the history, we're understanding where it comes from and why they do it, right? At the end of the day, Rav Moshe has a tshuva in Yeridei Chelik Aleph Siman Samach Beis where he wants to be mekel. If you go through the tshuva, and you're welcome to do so, have a look why he says it's mutter and see whether or not, based on the mitzias that we explained, it still applies. The Minchas Chitzok, as I told you in Chelik Beis, was mekel, but in Chelik Zayin he seems to have been chayzer from that, based on the mitzias that people are going with in that case. There are those that want to be mekel. They tie in a very interesting chiddush. They tie in the chiddush is that by the time the whiskey is poured into the sherry cask is more than 12 months after it was used for sherry. There is a halach in Hilchos Pesach in Arachayim Semen Tov Nun Aleph, also put that in Yeridei Semen Kuf Chav Aleph, whether or not if you leave it clean more than 12 months, does it automatically lose the taste inside, and therefore if you do something with that clean, it will not affect the food that you put inside it. So some want to say if it's been a 12-month period from the time the sherry left the cask to when you put the whiskey in, could be you have Yud Beis Chaydish, you have 12 months, and therefore that would be a mokum to say. Some want to say that they wash it with hot water before putting the whiskey in to make sure they get out the sherry. It's a type of agola. You'd be magalit, you kasher it. Again, there are definitely heterim lemaisa. I know when I was in Canada, I asked Rav Shlomo Minishlita, right, one of the biggest poskim we probably have, and he told me 100% it's mutter. There is no problem with sherry casks. It's absolutely fine. And what's that? Based on what? Based on a lot of different sirufim, zegorim, bittul, all sorts of things. I did not go to him and ask him, why. It's not nice. I said, what does the Rav hold about sherry casks? And he told me it's mutter. The London Basin, for example, rely on Rav Moshe, even nowadays, and they tell you you could be soymech on Rav Moshe in that case. The Manchester Manchester Basin, for example, I spent a lot of time going through different kashrus organizations. The kashrus organization that I spoke to, the Manchester Basin, told me that they wouldn't really give a hechsher on a simcha that had it, but they wouldn't be chaylik on anybody, lemaisa, that brings it to their simcha. I spoke to the Kadassia in London. I spoke to Dayan Westham Zatzal, who gives the hechsher on many, many things that we eat, candies and all these things. Mordechai Friedlander as well from the Badatz over here, that many of them said that lemaisa, that they are machmir in that case over there. And you have to know as well, because many whiskeys don't say what they are. Now, it's a double poshet that if a whiskey writes what it is and it says and it boasts, right? We saw on Shabbos, right? It has a sherry, it's a sherry cask. It means it's a double choshev to them. To dafka show that it's a sherry cask, not only do they go to the length and the money of getting a sherry cask to put the whiskey in, but they're boasting on the bottle that it is a sherry cask, which basically means that for them it's a double choshev. It's very, very schwer to say that there's a din bittel on something that is so choshev that you could see, that you could taste. Now, I can't taste the difference. I don't know if any of you over here can. I don't believe any of you can. That's the truth. There's only one person that I believe. Right? There's a yid out there. It doesn't make a difference what his name is. Right? He's actually originally Scottish, and he lemaisa. I was watching this. He said, put any whiskey in front of me, I'll tell you exactly which one it is. It's unbelievable. He told me he went to a Pesach hotel, right? Not a Pesach hotel. He went to one of these summer programs, right? Where they take over the hotel, whatever it is. He said, they have a bar over there where have all these bottles of whiskey, like 20, 30 types. He said, they put each one in front of me. I can tell you exactly which one it was, which year it was, and every make that it was. That's just incredible. So he could probably taste the difference. But for most of us, we can't taste the sherry, but we can maybe taste the difference between a yes sherry and a non-sherry, which once again leads to the shaila of, is it considered to be problematic because they can actually taste it, and therefore generally taste is not bottle. But many of the companies, by the way, will not actually tell you the word sherry. I'll give you some examples. They'll say burgundy finish, double aged, double mature, double wood, very, 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 very common one. Dual cask finish, port casks, port finish. Matured in 2 woods, obviously if it says sherry finish, special finish and wine finish. If it says any of those are the hints that is a sherry cask. Now, lemaisa, there is definitely a mocha to make. A lot of the olim ask me, what do I do, lemaisa? So I would say there's definitely a mocha to be made. I personally try not to drink it simply because there are kanai nahara, so many whiskeys out there that are just as good, in my personal, non-professional opinion, that are good, and therefore I could drink a non-sherry. There's a big mocha to say that a person should try to be machmir based on, again, the history that we learned, and Be'ez Hashem, the Rabban Shem give us siyata d'shmaya to make sure, like Tosfos says in Ksubas, that which goes into our mouth is correct, so that the Torah that we learn will also go in. Have a wonderful day.